The day she said his name, it was a gray Tuesday morning, and the smell of wet pavement clung to the schoolyard. Kids rushed through puddles, their laughter mixing with the sound of squeaky shoes and late bells. Inside, Miss Harper's third grade class, the mood was different. The walls were covered in bright posters about math and manners, but the air felt stiff, like something invisible held its breath. Sophie had always been quiet. She sat in the second row near the window, her brown eyes often drifting outside when the lessons grew dull. She wasn't shy, just thoughtful. Her clothes were simple, her ponytail never quite straight, and she always brought her lunch in a little blue box with stars on it. But today, Sophie had done something rare. During morning circle time, when Miss Harper asked the class to share what their parents did for work, Sophie raised her hand. "My dad is an actor," she said softly. A few kids turned to look at her. Some blinked. One boy snorted. "Yeah, right," said Jason, the loudmouth who always wore his cap backward. "What? Like a clown at birthday parties?" Sophie's cheeks turned red, but she shook her head. "No, a real actor." Miss Harper, who usually encouraged every child, paused. Her smile tightened. "And what's your father's name, Sophie?" she asked in a tone too sweet to be kind. Sophie hesitated. Her fingers fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater. "Keanu Reeves," she said finally. The room went silent. Then came a short burst of laughter, not from the students, but from Miss Harper. "Keanu Reeves?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Really, Sophie? You expect us to believe that?" Sophie looked down. She wasn't sure what to say. She had never told anyone at school who her dad was. Not because she was embarrassed, but because he always told her that being kind was more important than being famous. Miss Harper folded her arms. "Sophie, storytelling is fun, but there's a line between imagination and honesty. This classroom values truth, young lady. We don't make up wild stories for attention." The bell rang, but Sophie sat still. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just felt cold inside, like a glass of water tipped over in her chest. Later that day, at recess, the whispers began. Some kids asked if she was joking. Others told her she was weird. One girl asked if her dad was homeless, like in that one picture online. Sophie didn't answer. She sat by the fence, her sandwich untouched, but inside her heart, something stirred. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It was something older, something her father had taught her quietly every night. He tucked her in. "You don't have to prove anything," he once told her. "Truth stands on its own." Still, the ache didn't go away. The next morning, Miss Harper brought it up again, this time in front of the whole class. She smiled as she wrote the morning question on the board. "What do you want to be when you, grow up?" And no movie stars or superheroes today. The message was clear. Sophie understood. And so did the kids, who turned to look at her, a few smirking. That night at home, she didn't say much. She helped set the table, fed the dog, and sat quietly while her father, tired from a late shoot, poured her some warm milk. He noticed the silence. "You okay, Starlight?" he asked. She nodded at first, then looked up. "Do you think I should stop saying you're my dad?" Keanu Reeves froze. Not in anger, but in heartbreak. He reached across the table and held her hand. "Did someone make you feel that way?" She hesitated. Then slowly she told him everything. The laughter, the looks, the words from her teacher. When she finished, she felt hollow, like she had just emptied a box she'd been carrying all day. Keanu listened without interrupting. His eyes, always calm, turned glassy. He didn't tell her he'd fix it. He didn't promise revenge. Instead, he leaned in close and said softly, "You never have to hide who you are, not for anyone. And tomorrow, would it be all right if I walked you to school?" Sophie nodded, unsure. She had never seen her dad walk her into class before. He usually kept his distance, respecting her space. But this time, something felt different. The next morning, the sky was clear, no clouds, no wind. Sophie wore her favorite sweater, the yellow one with a small sunflower stitched near the sleeve. Her dad walked beside her wearing jeans, boots, and a plain black jacket. His hair was tied back, and he carried no sunglasses, no hat. They passed a few parents on the way. Some did a double take. Others slowed their cars. A woman walking her dog stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. By the time they reached the school gate, word had already spread. Phones buzzed, eyes widened. Sophie held her dad's hand tighter. Her heart beat fast. Inside the classroom, Miss Harper was just finishing roll call when the door opened. In stepped Keanu Reeves. At first, nobody moved. Then, a gasp, followed by a strange silence that spread across every desk like spilled ink. Miss Harper stood up. Her voice shook. Mr. Reeves? He nodded, gently, respectfully. Good morning. I'm Sophie's father, he said with a calm smile. She told me there was some confusion about who I am. The class was frozen. Even Jason looked like he'd swallowed a bee. Keanu turned to his daughter. Would it be all right if I stayed a minute? Sophie nodded slowly. He looked at the class, then at the teacher. I'm not here to cause a scene, he said, but I think it's important to remind young people that telling the truth shouldn't be punished, even when that truth seems surprising. He looked around the room with a quiet strength. Kids are taught to dream, he continued. But sometimes the first thing that gets crushed isn't the dream. It's the belief that their voice matters. Miss Harper tried to respond, but no words came. Keanu turned to his daughter, knelt beside her, and gave her a gentle hug. I'm proud of you, he whispered. That was when a few of the students started clapping. One, then two, then the whole class. Even Jason awkwardly joined in. Miss Harper sat down slowly, her eyes wet but her face pale. Keanu stood and nodded to the room. Have a good day, everyone. Then he walked out, the room still echoing with the sound of tiny hands clapping and a little girl's heart swelling with quiet pride. And that was just the beginning of how Sophie's truth changed everything. The rumor, the whispers, and the letter after Keanu Reeves left the classroom, the silence didn't go away. It hung in the air like fog, soft, heavy, and unspoken. Sophie sat at her desk, heart still thudding in her chest. She didn't know if she wanted to smile or cry. Around her, kids whispered, not like they did before with laughter, but now with awe. Was that really him? One girl asked in a low voice. My mom said he lives in the mountains, whispered another. Even Jason, the boy who had mocked her the loudest, stayed quiet. He kept sneaking glances at her, like he didn't know who she was anymore. Miss Harper said nothing for the rest of the morning. She handed out worksheets and avoided eye contact with Sophie. Her voice was flat, her smile fake. She didn't mention what had happened. Not in the lesson, not at break. Not even when the principal peeked in with a curious look. But something had shifted. Everyone could feel it. During lunch, Sophie sat alone again. Not because she wanted to, but because now the others didn't know how to sit with her. Some were scared, others were embarrassed. A few wanted to talk but didn't know how. Emma, the quiet girl from the back row, finally walked over and sat beside her. I believed you, she said. Sophie looked up. You did? Emma nodded. My cousin once saw your dad at a bookstore. She said he was super nice, didn't even act famous. They shared a sandwich. It was the first time Sophie had ever shared her lunch at school. But the kindness didn't last long. By the time Sophie got home, the story had already spread beyond the classroom. It was on a few local Facebook groups, in text messages between parents, and even in a photo someone's older brother had secretly taken of Keanu Reeves walking through the school gates. By morning, there was a buzz in the air. Parents were talking, teachers were whispering, and Miss Harper, though still silent, had gone strangely stiff, like she was carrying something too heavy inside. At recess, Sophie overheard a group of kids talking near the water fountain. My mom said the teacher's in trouble, one boy said. They think she embarrassed herself. I heard she's getting moved to the office, said another. Sophie didn't understand. She didn't want anyone in trouble. She had only told the truth. She had only wanted to be believed. Later that day, the school counselor, Miss Lewis, pulled Sophie aside. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked kindly, her office warm and full of plants. "Okay, I guess," Sophie replied. Ms. Lewis leaned forward. "You know, a lot of grown-ups don't always handle surprises well. Sometimes, when something doesn't fit their idea of the world, they react badly. It's not your fault." Sophie nodded slowly. "We're proud of you for speaking your truth," Ms. Lewis continued. "And your father. He showed us what it means to support your child with quiet strength." Sophie smiled a little. "He said truth doesn't need to be loud." Ms. Lewis chuckled softly. "He's right." That afternoon, Miss Harper didn't show up to class. A substitute named Mr. Hayes came in, cheerful and warm. He didn't say why he was there, but the classroom felt lighter somehow. Still, the questions didn't stop. Kids asked Sophie what it was like to live with someone famous. Did she have a mansion? Did he have real swords? Did he do kung fu at home? Sophie tried to answer politely. "We have a regular house," she'd say. And, "No, he doesn't fight at home. He likes to cook and fix motorcycles." Some kids didn't believe her. Others just listened with wide eyes. And slowly, day by day, the teasing faded. But in its place came something else. Curiosity, and sometimes something worse. Jealousy. One afternoon, Sophie found a note in her. "Cubby. Liar. Your dad's probably a fake, you just want attention." There was no name. No handwriting she recognized. Her chest tightened. She folded the note and placed it in her pocket. She didn't tell her dad that night. She didn't want to make him worry. But when she went to sleep, she clutched her stuffed bear tighter than usual. The next day, Sophie made a decision. After lunch, she walked up to Mr. Hayes's desk and asked if she could read something to the class. He looked surprised. "Of course," he said kindly. When everyone settled down, Sophie stood at the front of the room with a piece of paper in her hands. Her voice was small at first, but it grew stronger with each line. "My name is Sophie Reeves. I am 9 years old. My favorite color is green. I love pancakes, old movies, and dogs that tilt their heads when they listen. My dad is Keanu Reeves. He is kind. He makes breakfast even when he's tired. He listens when I'm sad. He never brags. He tells me stories at night and always says that being good is more important than being famous. Some people didn't believe me. That's okay. Some people were mean. That hurt. But I'm not reading this for them. I'm reading this because I don't want to hide anymore. It's okay to be proud of who you are, even if others laugh, even if they doubt you. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be true. And I know who my dad is. And more important, I know who I am." The room was still. A few kids clapped again. Emma wiped her eyes. Even Jason looked down at his desk. That evening, Sophie got home to find her dad fixing a bike in the garage. He looked up and smiled. "How was your day, Starlight?" She smiled back. "I told them," she said. He tilted his head. "Told them what?" "Everything. Who I am, who you are, but mostly, how much you love me." Keanu put down his wrench, stood up and hugged her tight. "You're braver than I ever was," he whispered. And that night, for the first time in days, Sophie slept without holding her bear. And while Sophie thought the storm had passed, a new ripple was just beginning. One that would soon reach every hallway of the school, and far beyond. The email that changed everything. 3 days after Sophie's brave speech, the school felt like a different place. Her classmates treated her with more respect. Even the kids who used to roll their eyes at her now said hello in the halls. Emma had become her close friend, and Mr. Hayes, the new substitute teacher, brought more warmth into the classroom than Sophie had ever felt before. But even with that calm, something lingered in the air, like thunder in the distance. On Thursday morning, while Sophie worked on her science poster with Emma, Principal Ramirez stood at the classroom door and spoke quietly with Mr. Hayes. The principal looked serious, holding a folded piece of paper and a phone. After a moment, he glanced at Sophie. His expression was gentle, but his eyes looked heavier than usual. Sophie's stomach tensed. She had done nothing wrong, but old feelings came back fast, like shadows that never fully disappeared. After lunch, Principal Ramirez called Sophie to his office. The hallway felt colder than before. She walked slowly, her sneakers making soft squeaks against the polished floor. When she stepped into the office, she saw Ms. Lewis sitting beside the principal. She gave Sophie a warm smile. "Come in, Sophie," Principal Ramirez said kindly. "You're not in trouble." She nodded and sat down, her legs swinging slightly off the chair. "We received an email this morning," he continued. "It came from someone very important. Your father." Sophie blinked. "Dad?" He nodded. "He sent a letter to the school board, the district superintendent, and to me." Ms. Lewis handed her a printed copy of the email. The top was simple, from Keanu Reeves. Sophie's eyes scanned the words. Her heart thudded with every sentence. "Dear Principal Ramirez, I'm writing not as a celebrity but as a father. I want to thank you for creating a space where my daughter could be heard, even when others doubted her." Sophie told the truth. She did so with grace, even after being mocked by a trusted adult. She showed strength that inspired me deeply. I know schools are places of learning, but they are also places where children learn who they are. What happened to Sophie should not have happened to any child. I'm not asking for punishment, I'm asking for reflection. Teachers must uplift, not humiliate, and when mistakes are made, the best educators use them to grow. I would like to come speak with the staff, not as an actor, but as a parent, and as a man who believes kindness is strength. Thank you for listening. Sincerely, Keanu Reeves. Sophie felt her throat tighten. The words were gentle but powerful, just like him. Principal Ramirez placed a hand on the letter. "We've decided to take your father up on his offer," he said. "Next Friday, during Staff Development Day, he'll be coming in to speak." Sophie blinked. "Just the teachers?" "Not just the teachers," Ms. Lewis said with a smile. "We think the whole school should hear him." Sophie's eyes widened. "What?" "It'll be optional for students," Principal Ramirez explained. "But we think many will want to listen. Your father has a way with words." Sophie didn't know what to say. Excitement and nervousness tangled inside her. When she got home, she ran to the garage. Keanu was under the car, legs sticking out, oil smudged on his jeans. "Dad," she called. He slid out, looking up. "Hey, Starlight." She held up the letter. "You sent this?" He stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, I wanted them to hear the full story. From me." She stared at him. "You're going to talk to everyone?" He nodded. "Only if you're okay with it." She nodded back, slowly. "Yeah, I want them to hear you. All of you." That night, Sophie helped him prepare. They sat at the dining table, working through old photos, notes, and memories. Keanu smiled as he held up a picture of her as a baby, asleep on his chest. "You've always had this calm," he said. "Even as a newborn, you looked like you were keeping the universe in balance." Sophie giggled. "You're just saying that." He winked. "Maybe, but it's true." By the next week, the entire school knew something big was coming. Flyers went up. Special guest speaker, Friday at noon, in the auditorium. A message about kindness, respect, and truth. The older kids rolled their eyes. Some guessed it was a motivational speaker. Others weren't sure. "Who's the guest?" One seventh grader asked. "Probably some guy with puppets," said another. But Sophie didn't say a word. She waited. When Friday finally arrived, the energy on campus was electric. Students, parents, teachers, even custodians gathered in the large auditorium. The seats filled quickly. Whispers buzzed like bees. Then the lights dimmed, and Keanu Reeves walked onto the stage. No bodyguards, no spotlight. Just him, wearing a simple dark shirt and jeans, hands in his pockets, hair slightly messy like always. A hush fell over the room. He stepped to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. "Thank you for having me," he began. I'm not here to talk about movies. I'm here to talk about moments, small ones, moments where we choose who we are. His voice was calm, steady, not loud, but deep. It reached every corner of the room. He spoke about growing up shy, about how being laughed at once made him go quiet for years. He talked about working in restaurants before films, about being invisible in crowded rooms, about how the way people treat each other leaves invisible marks. He shared how Sophie came home that night, how her voice didn't shake, but he could tell her heart did, how she asked if she should stop calling him her dad. He paused there, and the room held its breath. No child should ever feel they have to hide love, he said. Teachers looked down, a few wiped tears. Even Miss Harper, sitting in the back corner, had her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My daughter didn't ask for attention, he continued. She only asked to be believed. And belief is free. It costs nothing to give someone the benefit of the doubt. He looked at the younger students. To the kids listening, your voice matters, your truth matters, even if it surprises people. Then, he looked at the teachers. And to the adults, thank you for listening. Not just to me, but to the kids who whisper instead of shout. He stepped back, gave a small bow, and walked off the stage. The silence broke into thunderous applause. Students stood, parents clapped, even the teachers rose from their seats. Miss Harper didn't move. She just stared at the stage with wide eyes, her breath caught somewhere deep. Sophie, sitting with Emma in the front row, looked at her dad and felt something shift inside her. Not just pride, not just relief, but a deep, growing courage. But the biggest change was still to come, because one teacher wasn't ready to let go of her pride, and she was about to make a mistake that would test Sophie's strength all over again. The secret meeting and the broken promise. Monday morning arrived with a strange quiet. The usual chatter in the hallways had changed. It was softer, like everyone was still carrying the weight of Friday's speech. Students talked about it in whispers, and teachers moved slower, more thoughtful than usual. But not everyone had taken the message to heart. Miss Harper sat in an empty classroom at the far end of the school building. Her hands were clenched around a folder, her jaw tight. She had been avoiding the staff lounge since Friday. No one had said anything to her directly, but the looks were enough. Shame had found its way under her skin and built a home there. To the outside world, she acted like everything was normal, but inside, something bitter was growing. She had been the most respected teacher at that school for years. Her bulletin boards won awards. Her students always tested well. She followed the rules, held high standards, and believed in discipline. Then, one girl, one small voice had shattered that. He made me look like a fool, she whispered to herself, and they clapped for him. She stared down at a paper on her desk. It was a district form, reassignment notice pending review. Her name was on it. Rage bubbled quietly in her chest. They think I need training, she muttered. I don't need to be trained. I need to remind them who's in charge. Meanwhile, Sophie didn't know any of this. She was sitting under the big oak tree during lunch, sharing fruit with Emma and a few of the younger students who had started, following her around like a little group of admirers. My mom said your dad's the most humble person she's ever seen on TV, one boy said, chewing on an apple. He's really just my dad, Sophie said with a shy smile. He still burns toast sometimes. They laughed and Sophie felt light, like maybe things were finally safe. But by Tuesday, the tone had changed again. Miss Harper returned to the classroom. She wasn't teaching, but she was helping in the reading lab for the week. Still, her presence was strong, her voice sharp and her eyes always watching. On Wednesday, Sophie found another note in her desk. You and your dad made everything worse. Not everyone forgives. This one was typed. No handwriting to trace. Emma tried to comfort her. They're just jealous. Don't listen. But Sophie couldn't stop wondering. Who hadn't forgiven? That afternoon, Principal Ramirez called an emergency staff meeting. Teachers gathered in the library, murmuring about the agenda. Ms. Lewis sat near the front, notebook in hand. Miss Harper entered last, Principal Ramirez stood at the head of the room. As many of you know, we've begun reviewing concerns about how certain situations have been handled in the past, especially regarding student respect and communication, he said calmly. This isn't about pointing fingers, it's about moving forward. A few teachers nodded. Next week we'll begin mandatory kindness and empathy training sessions. All staff will participate. The room shifted, and then Miss Harper stood. With respect, sir, she began, her voice steady but cold. Some of us have been teaching for decades. We know how to handle children. One emotional moment doesn't mean we've failed. Ms. Lewis raised an eyebrow. No one is saying you failed. We're saying everyone can grow. And what about accountability? Miss Harper snapped. Because I've been made the villain of a story that only had one side told. The room went quiet. Miss Harper, Principal Ramirez said firmly, you humiliated a child, and when given the chance to apologize, you stayed silent. No one is blaming you for being surprised, but we are asking you to reflect. Her eyes narrowed. And what if I don't want to reflect? He looked at her for a long moment. Then you may need to consider whether this school is still the right place for you. The meeting ended with tension so thick it could be touched. By Friday, something unexpected happened. A letter began spreading among the teachers. It was anonymous, typed, printed quietly. Teachers must not be ruled by feelings or by fame. Our job is to teach, not to entertain. The current shift in tone has turned us from leaders into fans. Education is not a stage. We must restore order. It didn't name Sophie. It didn't name Keanu, but everyone knew. Ms. Lewis found a copy in her mailbox. So did Mr. Hayes. Even Principal Ramirez received one, slipped under his door. He gathered the staff again. Whoever wrote this, he said, has forgotten that education begins with the heart. If you cannot lead with empathy, you cannot lead at all. Meanwhile, Sophie had noticed small changes. Her math paper had been graded with a red pen, marked down for things that weren't wrong. She had been pulled out of line during lunch and told her sweater didn't meet dress code, though she had worn it many times before. And once walking past the reading lab, she heard someone say softly, "You think one speech makes you better than us?" She turned and saw Miss Harper looking at her through the window. The chill returned. That night, Sophie told her dad. He listened, jaw tight, hands still. I didn't want to make things worse, she said, tears forming. I just wanted to tell the truth. Keanu knelt in front of her, gently wiping her cheek. You did everything right, he said softly, but sometimes truth makes people uncomfortable, especially when it shows them something about themselves they don't want to see. What do we do now? She whispered. He thought for a moment. We keep being kind, but we don't stay quiet. Not when someone tries to hurt you again. On Monday, Sophie walked into school with her chin a little higher, but just before the morning bell rang, Miss Lewis came rushing down the hallway. Sophie, she said, breathless, you need to come with me. Now. Sophie followed her, confused and a little scared. When they reached the office, Principal Ramirez was on the phone, his face pale. He looked up. There was an incident, he said. We need to call your father. Right away. What happened? Sophie asked. But no one answered. Not yet. Because deep in the school's server, a message had been sent from Miss Harper's account. One that would bring cameras, headlines, and a truth too big to stay hidden. The message, the media, and the microphone, the school hallways had never felt this loud. By lunchtime, the news vans were parked outside the school gates. Long cameras sat on tripods. Reporters in suits and scarves stood under umbrellas, and students crowded the windows, peeking through the blinds. Someone had leaked the story, but only a few people knew the full truth. Inside the principal's office, Sophie sat beside her dad, her small hands gripping his sleeve. Across from them sat Principal Ramirez, Mrs. Lewis, and a school district investigator, a calm-looking woman with glasses and a tablet. Keanu Reeves didn't speak first. He waited. The investigator tapped the screen gently and turned it toward them. This email, she said, Was sent early this morning from Miss Harper's school account to a group of local media addresses. The email subject line read, "Actor Keanu Reeves interferes with school decisions. Daughter receiving special treatment." The body of the message was worse. It accused Sophie of manipulating staff. It suggested Keanu was using his fame to change school policy. It claimed the staff had been forced to applaud and that true educators were being silenced. It was bitter, cold, and personal. Sophie's lips trembled as she read. Keanu's hand moved to her shoulder, steady and warm. Principal Ramirez sighed. "We're investigating how this message was sent, but the login trail leads directly to Miss Harper's terminal. We're waiting on district approval before we take further steps." The investigator added, "We've asked her to stay home for now, but the damage has spread fast." Keanu finally spoke, voice calm and strong. "This isn't about me, it's about a child, and a system that allowed a grown adult to bully her not once but again and again." He looked at the principal. "How are you protecting her now?" Sophie didn't cry, but she stared at the floor, feeling small and exposed, like her world had no walls anymore. Keanu turned to the investigator. "I don't need apologies. I don't want headlines. I want accountability, and I want my daughter to feel safe when she walks into her school." The investigator nodded slowly. "We understand." That night, Keanu took Sophie home early. They sat on the back porch wrapped in a blanket as rain tapped softly on the railing. "I didn't mean to cause all this," Sophie said. Keanu looked at her. "You didn't. Someone else did. Someone who couldn't accept being wrong. But now everyone's talking about me. Again." He nodded. "They are. But what they say isn't who you are. You already showed them the truth. Now they're just deciding who they want to be in response to it." Sophie leaned against him. "Will it ever stop?" Keanu thought for a long moment. "Maybe not. But here's what I've learned. When you live with honesty, with kindness, and without pretending, even the noise can't touch your peace." He looked out at the night sky. "And sometimes," he added, "you answer loud voices not with silence, but with a bigger truth." The next morning, Keanu made a decision. He agreed to appear on a local television segment, not as a celebrity but as a parent. He didn't bring a publicist. He wore the same jeans and black shirt he always did. And when the reporter asked why he was there, his answer was simple. "Because a child was mocked for telling the truth. And I won't stay silent when any child feels small for being honest." He didn't attack the school. He didn't say names. He talked about empathy, about how kindness begins in classrooms, about how every child deserves to be seen without having to prove themselves. When the clip aired that afternoon, the internet exploded. Hashtags began trending. Believe Sophie. Kindness in schools. Keanu for truth. Teachers across the country began sharing their own stories. Students posted about moments they were doubted or dismissed. Parents wrote letters to schools asking how empathy was being taught in classrooms. The ripple was growing. Meanwhile, Miss Harper had vanished from the public eye. The district suspended her pending full investigation. When asked for comment, she declined. But inside, she was stewing. She watched the coverage with gritted teeth, replaying the same moment in her head. Sophie standing in front of the class, calm and brave. And the applause. The applause that made her feel powerless. "He turned me into a villain," she whispered to herself. And they let him. But what she didn't know was that the district had found something else. A second message. This one hadn't been sent. It was still in her drafts folder, and it was worse. A message calling Sophie entitled, saying she had weaponized sympathy, and that some children need to learn humility the hard way. When the superintendent read it, he said only one word: enough. By Friday, the school board released a statement. "We believe in second chances, but not at the cost of a child's dignity." Effective immediately, Miss Harper will no longer serve in any teaching role within this district. At school, Sophie was called into the office again. This time, not for a warning, not for protection, but to be honored. Principal Ramirez handed her a small glass plaque. For courage and truth, it read. The school created a new program in her name, the Sophie Reeves Kindness Initiative. Each month, a student would be recognized not for grades, not for achievements, but for honesty, empathy, and compassion. During the announcement, Sophie stood on stage beside her dad, looking out at the same students who once laughed. Now they clapped for her, not because of who her father was, but because of who she had become. Afterward, Ms. Lewis hugged her tightly. You reminded this school who it's meant to serve, she whispered, and that is something no teacher's title can ever outrank. Outside, under the same oak tree where everything had once started, Sophie sat with Emma, the little plaque in her lap. I don't feel like a hero, Sophie said. Emma smiled. You don't have to feel it. You are one. But as Sophie smiled, under the sunlight, a letter arrived in her mailbox that weekend, one written in shaky handwriting, from a teacher who had never said the word she now needed to say. The letter, the visit, and the voice that mattered most, the letter came in a plain envelope. No stamps, no return address. Just her name, Sophie Reeves, written in delicate cursive. That seemed both careful and tired. She found it Saturday morning, tucked between a magazine and the grocery coupons. At first she thought it was a school note or another invitation. But something about the handwriting made her pause. It wasn't her teacher's writing. It wasn't from the school office. And it wasn't typed. She sat on the couch, the sunlight spilling through the living room window, and carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. It had no greeting, no dear Sophie, just the words, slow, deliberate, and painful to read. I was wrong, not just once, not just in that moment. I've been wrong in many ways. I thought truth came from adults. I thought children needed to be shaped, not heard. I thought fame was dangerous. And then you stood there, not shouting, not begging, just standing. And I realized I had crushed something beautiful. I was jealous of your honesty, of your father's calm, of the way people listened to you when they stopped listening to me. I see now that being a teacher doesn't mean knowing more. It means growing more. And I stopped growing long ago. You taught me something I forgot. Truth doesn't need a loud voice, just a steady one. I'm sorry, Sophie. I hope someday you'll forgive me. M.H. Sophie read it twice, then a third time, then sat still for several minutes. The letter didn't fix everything. It didn't undo the whispers, the notes, the long lunches spent alone. It didn't erase the fear or the hurt, but it did something else. It acknowledged it. And for Sophie, that was enough. She showed the letter to her dad later that evening. He read it silently, then looked up at her with a soft smile. How do you feel? He asked. Like, maybe she remembered who she used to be, Sophie said quietly. Are you going to write back? Sophie nodded. I think I already have. That Monday, she returned to school with a new calm. Not the quiet kind that hides, but the strong kind that stays. In the morning assembly, Principal Ramirez made an announcement. As part of the Kindness Initiative, he said, we'll be inviting students to share stories, real stories, about moments when they stood up, spoke out, or supported someone in need. Sophie will speak first. The students clapped, and Sophie walked to the microphone, her footsteps steady. She looked out over the crowd. Hundreds of faces, some curious, some proud, a few even teary. She took a deep breath. A year ago, I never would have stood here, she began. I was the girl who sat near the window and didn't say much. I liked being invisible, because being seen was scary. A pause. Then I said something true, and people didn't believe me. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was too real for them. She glanced toward the staff row where Ms. Lewis sat smiling. Sometimes telling the truth feels like setting a fire. It lights up the dark, but it can burn you too. But I learned that truth isn't just about facts. It's about the courage to say, this is who I am and I won't shrink. Another pause. Kindness isn't weakness. And being quiet doesn't mean you don't matter. I stood up not because I was brave, but because I was tired of pretending. She looked at her classmates. So if someone ever laughs at your truth, don't let that be the end. Let it be the beginning. The room was silent for a moment, then applause. Slow at first, then rising. A teacher in the back wiped her eyes. A second grader raised her hand and asked, "Can Sophie come to our class and tell us more?" By the end of the week, Sophie had visited 4 classrooms, answering questions, reading books, and even helping a shy boy tell his class what he wanted to be when he grew up. It wasn't a firefighter or a superhero. "I want to be kind," he said, and everyone clapped. In the months that followed, the Sophie Reeves Kindness Initiative became more than a program. It became a movement. Students started kindness journals. Teachers gave weekly empathy awards. The lunch tables were filled with more shared meals, fewer left-out kids. Sophie still had quiet days. She still liked to sit under the oak tree, still wore her old blue lunchbox, and still had dreams no one knew about. But she had changed, not into someone louder or tougher or different, but into someone seen. Her father still walked her to school, sometimes, not every day, but on the ones that mattered, and he always told her the same thing before she stepped through the gates. Be kind, be true, and remember you already have everything you need. And one day, years later, when Sophie was asked to speak at a national event for student leadership, she brought out that old letter, the one from Miss Harper. She didn't read it to shame her, she read it to show what growth looked like, because sometimes the greatest act of kindness is forgiveness. And that was how a quiet girl, who once whispered the truth, became the voice that helped the world remember how to listen.